and the beautiful and varied views we met at every turn were full of interest. Santa Clara is a striking, imposing mass of buildings, beautifully situated at the foot of three bold high rocks, with a remarkably handsome church attached to it. The family were from home, and the agent was a philosopher, living upon herb tea, quite above the common affairs of life. It is a fine hacienda, and very productive, but sad and solitary in the extreme, and as K and I walked about in the courtyard after supper, where we had listened to frightful stories of robbers and robberies, we felt rather uncomfortably dreary, and anxious to change our quarters. We visited the sugar works, which are like all others, the chapel, which is very fine, and the shop where they sell spirituous liquors and calicoes. The hills looked gray and solemn. The sun sank gloomy behind them, his colour a turbid red. So much had been said about robbers that we were not sure how our next day's journey might terminate. The administrador's own servant had turned out to be the captain of a band, whom the robbers, from some mysterious motive, had murdered a few days before. As we intended to rise before dawn, we went to bed early, about 9 o'clock, and were just in the act of extinguishing a melancholy looking candle, when we were startled by the sight of an alacran on the wall. A man 6 feet high came at our call. He looked at the scorpion, shook his head, and ran out. He came back in a little while with another large man, he with a great shoe in his hand, and his friend with a long pole. While they were both hesitating how to kill it, Don Juan came in and did the deed. We had a melancholy night after this, afraid of everything, with a long unsnuffed candle illuminating the darkness of our large and lonely chamber. The next morning, the 9th of February, before sunrise, we took our leave, in the darkness, of Santa Clara and the philosopher. The morning, wonderful to relate, was windy and almost cold. The roads were frightful, and we hailed the first gray streak that appeared in the eastern sky, announcing the dawn, which might enable us at least to see our perils. Fortunately, it was bright daylight when we found ourselves crossing a barranca, so dangerous that after following for some time the precipitous course of the mountain path, we thought it advisable to get off our horses, who were pawing the slippery rock, without being able to find any rest for the soles of their feet. We had a good deal of difficulty in getting along ourselves on foot among the loose, sharp stones, and the horses, between sliding and stumbling, were a long while in accomplishing the descent. After climbing up the barranca, one of them ran off along the edge of the cliff, as if he were determined to cut the whole concern, and we wasted some time in catching him. It was the afternoon when we rode through the lanes of a large Indian village, and shortly after arrived at Colon, an hacienda belonging to Don Antonio Oria. He was from home, but the good reception of the honest administrador, the nice, clean, cheerful house, with its pretty painted chairs, good beds, the excellent breakfasts and dinners, and the good will visible in the whole establishment, delighted us very much, and decided us to pitch our tent here for a day or two. Some Spaniards, hearing of C n's arrival, rode over from a distance to see him, and dined with us. There was a capital housekeeper, famous for her excellent cakes and preserves. We had also the refreshment of a warm bath, and felt ourselves as much at home as if we had been in our own house. The next morning we rode through the great sugar-cane fields to the hacienda of San Nicolas, one of the finest estates in the republic, 18 leagues long and 5 wide, belonging to Señor Zamora in right of his wife. It is a productive place, but a singularly dreary residence. We walked out to see all the works, which are on a great scale, and breakfasted with the proprietor, who was there alone. We amused ourselves by seeing the workmen receive their weekly pay, this being Saturday, and at the mountains of copper piled up on tables in front of the house. There is a feeling of vastness, of solitude, and of dreariness in some of these great haciendas which is oppressive, especially about noon, when everything is still, and there is no sound except the incessant buzz of myriads of insects. I can imagine it like what the world must have been before man was created. Colon, which is not so large as San Nicolas, has a greater air of life about it, and in fact we liked it so well that, as observed, we seemed inclined to consider it not as a Colon but a full stop. You must not expect more vivacious puns in tierra caliente. We rode back from San Nicolas in the afternoon, accompanied by the proprietor, and had some thoughts of going to Matamoras in the evening, to see the Barber of Seville, performed by a strolling company in the open air under a tree. Admittance 25 cents. However, we ended by remaining where we were, and spent the evening in walking about through the village, surrounded by barking dogs, the greatest nuisance in these places, and pulling wild flowers, and gathering castor oil nuts from the trees. A begging Franciscan friar from the convent of San Fernando arrived for his yearly supply of sugar, which he begs from the different haciendas for his convent, a tribute which is never refused. We left our hospitable entertainer the next morning with the addition of sundry baskets of cake and fruit from the housekeeper. As we were setting off, I asked the administrador if there were any barrancas on this road. "No," said he, "but I have sent a basketful with one of the boys, as they are very refreshing." I made no remark, concluding that I should find out his meaning in the course of the journey, but keeping a sharp lookout on the mysterious mozo who was added to our train. When the light became stronger, I perceived that he carried under his sarape a large basket of fine naranjas (oranges), which no doubt the honest administrador thought I was inquiring after. It rained when we left Colon, a thick misty drizzle, and the difference of the temperature gave us notice that we were passing out of tierra caliente. The road was so straight and uninteresting, though the surrounding country was fertile, that a few barrancas would really have been enlivening. At Colon we took leave of our conductors, Don Juan, who returned to Atlacamulco, and got a new director of our forces, a handsome man, Don Francisco, who had been a Spanish soldier. We had an uncomfortable ride in a high wind and hard rain, the roads good but devoid of interest, so that we were glad when we learnt that Atlisco, a town where we were to pass the night, was not far off. Within a mile or two of the city we were met by a tall man on horseback, with a pink turban and a wild, swarthy face, who looked like an Abencerrage, and who came with the compliments of his master, a Spanish gentleman, to say that a house had been prepared for us in the town. Atlisco is a large town, with a high mountain behind it, crowned by a white chapel, a magnificent church at the base, the whole city full of fine churches and convents, with a plaza and many good houses. The numerous pipes pointed all along from the roofs have a very threatening and warlike effect. One seems to ride up the principal street under a strong fire. We found that Don Fernando , Pink Turban's master, not considering his own house good enough, had, on hearing of our expected arrival, hired another, and furnished part of it for us. This is the sort of wholesale hospitality one meets with in this country. Our room looked out upon an old Carmelite monastery, where C n, having a recommendation to the prior, paid a visit, and found one or two good paintings. Here also we saw the famous cypress mentioned by Humboldt, which is 73 feet in circumference. The next morning we set out with an escort of 7 mozos, headed by Don Francisco, and all well armed, for the road from Atlisco to Puebla is the robbers' highway par excellence. This valley of Atlisco, as indeed the whole department of Puebla, is noted for its fertility, and its abundant crops of maguey, wheat, maize, frijoles, garbanzos, barley, and other vegetables, as well as for the fineness of its fruits, its chirimoyas, etc. There is a Spanish proverb which says, "Si a morar en Indias fueres, que si a dude los volcanes vieres." If you go to live in the Indias, let it be within sight of the volcanoes, for it appears that all the lands surrounding the different volcanoes are fertile, and enjoy a pleasant climate. The great Cordilleras of Anahuac cross this territory, and amongst these are the mountain of the Malinchi, Ixtaccihuatl, Popocatepetl, and the peak of Orizava. The Malinchi, a corruption by the Spaniards of the Indian name Malintzin, signifying Doña María or Marina, is supposed to be called after Cortes's Indian Egeria, the first Christian woman of the